the age when death was rushed. In the Middle Ages, death was not clear or definitive in the way we understand it today. Death was not something that could be measured. It was not a fact that could be tested or verified. Death was a decision. If the body did not move, if the eyes were closed, if breathing could not be detected, that was often considered sufficient, because people feared delaying death. Delay meant disease. Delay meant the risk of epidemic. For this reason, death in the Middle Ages was not postponed, and in some cases, it arrived earlier than it should have. Why were people buried? People in the Middle Ages were not cruel. They simply lacked medical knowledge. Cardiac auscultation was not performed. Brain function was not assessed. Prolonged observation was not practiced. There were plague outbreaks. There were cases of cholera. There were unexplained febrile illnesses. Once the decision dead was made, the body was no longer an individual, but a potential threat, and threats were placed underground. Diseases that mimicked death. Some conditions produced symptoms almost identical to death: catalepsy, deep coma states, post-epileptic immobility, severe febrile illnesses. The person was alive, but unresponsive. Breathing continued, but could not be detected. Silence was interpreted as death. The moment they thought I was dead, my eyes are closed, but my mind is awake. There are voices. I hear someone say my name, but the voice feels distant, as if they are speaking past me, not to me. They do not sense that I am there. Someone is sobbing. Another whispers a prayer. Then the words are spoken. There is nothing more to be done. That is the moment I understand. They are going to lower me into the ground, and I cannot stop it. Why is this fear so intense? Scientific. The human brain cannot tolerate the possibility of burial. This scenario activates multiple survival mechanisms simultaneously: perceived oxygen deprivation, motor restriction, blocked escape routes, loss of auditory feedback, and preserved consciousness. The brain does not classify this as death, but as an inescapable threat. This classification triggers a panic response. Executive functions are suppressed. Rational thinking shuts down. Breathing becomes irregular, and due to rising carbon dioxide levels, the individual experiences the sensation of suffocation by their own breath. The coffin. The wooden surface is cold. The space is extremely confined. The upper limbs are fixed alongside the body. Voluntary movement of the lower limbs is impossible. The sound of the lid closing is heard. This is not the sound of a door closing. It is the moment when all physical and sensory contact with the external world is severed. At this point, the relationship with the world has ended. The earth. The first layer of soil hits the lid. A short, solid sound, then a second impact. Each contact signals the weakening of acoustic connection with the outside world. Sounds become muffled. External perception fades. From this stage onward, stimuli are largely cut off. The individual is now aware only of their own body and the surrounding darkness. Panic and time. Once the panic response begins, cognitive functions are suppressed. The person cannot think. Only breathing continues. Faster, more erratic. But this speed becomes a disadvantage for survival. Oxygen is consumed rapidly. ambient temperature rises, carbon dioxide accumulates, time perception collapses. Seconds are subjectively experienced as hours. At this stage, waiting itself becomes a greater stressor than physiological death. Historical facts. Years later, when some graves were reopened, disturbing findings were discovered. Scratch marks on the inner surfaces of coffins, blood residues in the wood, skeletons found turned on their side or face down. These findings indicated that some individuals were alive at the moment they were buried. This realization led, in the 19th century, to the development of so-called safety coffins, bell systems that could be rung from inside, air pipes, rope mechanisms extending to the surface. But the true lesson was this: when fear and ignorance combine, death becomes inevitable. After the graves were opened, years passed. The soil settled. Silence became permanent. Fear faded with time. It was believed that those buried were truly dead, until some graves were reopened, some due to relocation, some for new burials, some purely by chance. And in that moment, no one was prepared for what they saw. Silent witnesses. When coffin lids were opened, the position of the bodies did not match expectations. Some skeletons were on their side. Some were face down. Some had their lower limbs drawn toward the chest. These were not positions a passive body assumes after death. Because after death, muscle activity does not occur. Yet in these cases, body positions had changed. This indicated that movement had occurred after burial. Fingernail marks. The most striking findings were on the inner surfaces of coffin lids. Deep scratch marks were documented on the wood. In some cases, blood residues were still distinguishable. Broken fingernails, traumatic damage to finger bones. These marks could not be explained by post-mortem changes. The evidence showed one thing clearly: the individual had regained consciousness and had attempted to escape. But the coffin allowed no interaction with the outside world. Faces. In some skeletons, the condition of the facial bones was abnormal. Jaws were fixed in an open position. Teeth were clenched with force. Cracks and microfractures were identified in some skulls. These findings could not be explained by natural decomposition. The pattern reflected intense muscle contractions during panic. These individuals did not die in a calm loss of consciousness. Death occurred amid violent struggle and escape responses. Medical awareness. By the 18th and 19th centuries, physicians began to recognize an important truth. Some individuals could appear dead for hours, days, and in rare cases, weeks. Yet during this time, consciousness was not entirely lost. Mental awareness could persist within the body. This realization did not emerge from clinical observation. It came from inside graves. The silent witnesses, too late, revealed the truth. Social panic. As these findings spread, cemeteries ceased to be places of peace. A new question began to circulate. What if someone is still alive? What if the death decision was wrong? This anxiety directly altered burial practices. Burials were delayed. Bodies were observed for days. New methods were developed to confirm death. But this change did not arrive in time for everyone. For some, the awareness came far too late. Silent shame. these graves were closed again. What happened was not spoken aloud. The stories were passed on in whispers, because these events were not the result of war, not the outcome of plague, not acts of murder. These events were the result of human error. Empathera. When the graves were opened, people realized one thing: the earth can cover everything, but it cannot hide the truth, because some graves contain not only the dead, but conscience itself.